Anxiety is a protective emotion generally for most people. So when we can have a negative anticipation of a future event, it allows us to, in a sense, look into the future and say something poor or bad may happen. And therefore, how do I plan for it? How do I protect so that upon reaching that anticipated future, I'm okay?
Hey everybody, my guest today is a social worker with decades of experience. He's also been a columnist, author, conference speaker. He's very good at what he does, and I really encourage you to follow him on Facebook, where he gives away lots of great advice, absolutely free of charge. His name is Gary Direnfeld. I've known him for a number of years, and today we talked about strategies for dealing with anxiety, especially in these unprecedented times with COVID-19. This is my conversation with Gary Direnfeld. I'm very pleased to be joined today by Gary Direnfeld. Gary, I've known you for 2 or 3 years now. I think we met at a conference in Niagara Falls. We were both speaking
don't
there.
kid yourself. It goes, I think that conference was more than 2 or 3 years ago.
Time is flying. So we've known each other for quite some time. Why don't you, first of all, thanks very much for taking the time to speak with me today during these, very interesting and unprecedented times. Why don't you take just a minute to describe who you are to our audience, please?
Yeah, well, if you could see me, you'd see a head of gray hair and a gray beard. So I'm this 64-year-old social worker, old fart, who's been around the block once or twice. I'm in private practice. I work from my home in Georgina, Ontario, or Keswick, Ontario. This area is known by a few different names. I over the years, I've worked with all kinds of people having all kinds of problems in all kinds of settings: adult mental health, children's mental health, child welfare, hospital medical, issues of mental health, anxiety, depression, bipolar, obsessive compulsive disorders, anxiety. Yeah, I work with parents, how to get my 2-year-old to mind, sleep through the night, eat their peas, go potty. And then how do I get my teenager to do half those things revisited, right? I also work with parents of the 20-somethings. How do I get them the hell out of the house? Or parents of the 30 to 40-somethings. What do I do when they've returned to the house, kids in tow?
Right.
So it's kind of funny because you can work with parents across the whole developmental span. I work with couples. He said, she said, infidelity, sex, communication, drugs, alcohol, violence, in-laws, outlaws.
The whole spectrum.
The whole spectrum. And I do a lot of work with separated parents. I used to do a lot of work in the family court system. No longer do that. It's gotten too nasty. And, it used to, like, I would influence the outcome as an assessor in child custody disputes. And it used to be that if somebody didn't like the outcome, they'd still thank you, shake your hand, and move on. That was 30 years ago. And with each successive decade, people have gotten nastier to the point where now if they don't like the outcome, they sue us, they take us to our regulatory bodies, they write nasty things on the internet. So I don't do that, but I still work with separated parents in what we call peacemaking. And those are things like collaborative family law, mediation, coaching, and counseling. And then you unleashed me. And then beyond that, a lot of work in the media. Many folks know me from as a reality TV host, Newlywed, Nearly Dead.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that was on the Slice channel. It ran for 65 episodes. But like Gilligan and Gilligan's Island, even though it's in rerun, I don't get any residuals.
So need a better agent.
And then I was a parenting columnist for the Hamilton Spectator.
Right.
650 columns there as well.
So you've been around the block a few times, right?
That's it.
Have you ever seen in your travels anything like the situation that we all find ourselves in today?
Well, isn't that something? Because no matter what I can tell you from my background, I've never, ever seen anything like what we're coping with today. It is of epic proportion. I did live through SARS, and interestingly enough, my brother and sister-in-law were in China when SARS was spreading around the world. They were picking up their daughter. They adopted their daughter there. And when they came back, they had to quarantine themselves. And I was a bit of a go-between between himself and his office while they were away, facilitating what would happen upon his return and the quarantine. So I've lived through that part, but back then we weren't social isolating the whole world. So this is on a scale that's unprecedented.
So obviously one of the big stories and I think all of this is tied together, but one of the big threads I keep seeing, and when you keep chatting with people, is just the anxiety. And different people have it in different degrees, but I don't think there's many people that have none, that are just being super zen through this period and have no worries. And I guess in ways it's partly the way the human brain is wired. We're wired. I looked up the definition for anxiety, and you can tell me if this is accurate or correct, but it's basically an emotional response to an anticipated future threat. And in this situation, we've got a spectrum of threats all over the place. What happens if this and this and this and this, and this set of dominoes? So the first question right out of the gate is, what is your top line advice for people who are experiencing a level of anxiety that is actually impacting their lives in a negative way right now? What would your advice be to them?
Sure. I'm going to dial back a bit first and go back to your definition of anxiety, negative anticipation of a future event. When we use the word anxiety, it's typically with a negative connotation. I'm feeling anxious. Oh, that's terrible. You poor thing. You shouldn't be feeling. Well, wait a minute. Anxiety is within the range of normal human emotions. Anxiety is a protective emotion generally for most people. Anxiety is what keeps us safe. So when we can have a negative anticipation of a future event, it allows us to, in a sense, look into the future and say something poor or bad may happen. And therefore, how do I plan for it? How do I protect so that upon reaching that anticipated future, I'm okay? So this is a healthy anxiety. Where it becomes problematic is when it incapacitates us, when it overwhelms us, when it keeps us from getting on with the tasks of daily living. So even if you're tremendously fretting about this, if you're still getting through the tasks of daily living, that's not so bad. Now, we want to be mindful of a couple things. The first is anxiety is contagious. It's amazing. But it's contagious. So if you have little ones around and you are fretting, you are the barometer by which the little ones gauge how problematic the world is. So if you're fretting, it can create the conditions where they start fretting. And they don't know what they're fretting about. They just see you fret, so they fret. That in turn can create in them what we call a generalized anxiety disorder. I'm sitting here, my parent is worried about something, don't know what it is, but I better be fearful. And so now I'm fearful. Sometimes feelings like to attach themselves to real events. So here I am, I'm this child, I have this generalized anxiety. I don't know what to be afraid of, but I'm afraid of something. Then I'm told, let's go outside. No, I don't want to go outside because maybe that's what I should be fearful of. So I'm looking to attach my anxiety to a real life event. Now we say this kid has social anxiety,
right,
or agoraphobia. So parents, we want to dial back our own anxiety. We want to be careful about ourselves being contagious with respect to anxiety. We don't want to infect our children with that. So now we're going to come full circle. Your question was, well, what if somebody is tremendously anxiety, it is impacting their life? What is our advice for them? turn down your television or your radio or your Facebook. Everything except this podcast.
Right.
Because this is where you're getting help. So we do want you to access those resources that help you to soothe, help you to calm. And we want you to step away from those that are actually feeding and triggering your fears. It's not healthy. The other thing that you can do are what we call mindfulness exercises, deep breathing, relaxation, meditation. Very often, along with anxiety, our body can get frenetic. Our shoulders can go up to our ears. Our breathing gets shallow. This is the physiological response to those feelings. As we become mindful with respect to our physiological response, we're actually able to control it. So as I realized, even while talking to you, Warren, that my shoulders had crept up to my ears, I can feel it. I can literally lower my shoulders and take that deep breath.
I am a stress carrier, so I should let you know that.
All righty. Well, I'm going to infect you with my calm. And that's another strategy for oneself and for parents whose children do appear anxious with or without the parent having infected the child. Kids can be anxious on their own without us. So knowing that feelings, all feelings, not just anxiety, all feelings can be contagious, we actually get to use that constructively. So as I find my calm, as I lower my shoulders, as I'm aware of my breathing, as I breathe more diaphragmatically, deep breathing into the gut, I calm myself down. And now I can approach my children from that place of calm. So instead of, your toys are all over the place, blah, 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 it's, oh, sweetheart, come here. That's nice. Help me put some stuff away. You achieve the same end, but it's with such a different disposition. And now you're spreading your calm. Is this helpful?
That's great. And I think, that is helpful when times are good, never mind when times are bad. I asked some people to send in questions that I was going to be speaking with you. I said, if anyone has any specific questions, send those in. One of them was, what happens if, I sleep pretty well, no matter what's going on. I fall asleep in less than a minute, and I usually sleep through the night. What if you're one of those people who wakes up at 3 and 4 in the morning and starts freaking out? Like, what if I lose my job? What if I can't pay my rent? What if someone gets sick? What if I get sick? And then those thoughts seem to be more pressing when you're sitting there in bed, everything is quiet. There have to be a lot of people going through that right now. What would be your advice to those folks before they go to sleep at night?
Another excellent question. The truth of the matter is there are many folks whose sleep will be disrupted with worry, with what we're going through. That makes them normal. We all need to survive, and underneath that survival is having a job, being able to buy those 1,000 rolls of toilet paper or whatever else it is you want, being able to put gas in the car. So having access to money as a resource, if that is threatened, we will worry. If you're waking up in the middle of the night and that is on your mind, all of these thoughts we can frame as the fear of loss of control. The fear of loss of I've lost my job, I've lost, my ability to go out and see other people, loss of control. We typically tell people, don't continue to lie there in bed, actually, thinking you can force yourself to sleep. It's paradoxical. The more you force yourself to go to sleep, the more awake you're going to be, the more those thoughts are going to stream.
Right.
It's okay to actually get up out of bed. What I tell people is to try and be constructive with your time. You're going to be up. It is worse if you're up and you've wasted your time, and you look back at that time as it's just gone. So when you get up, maybe there's a book to read. Maybe there is a cup to clean and put away. Maybe there's some tidying up to do. Maybe there's some preparation for something else. I typically suggest to people to use their time constructively. So it not only occupies us, it helps restore a sense of control. Control, at least to the extent possible, within one's own home, within one's own environment. You know, later in the day, you're going to look back and say, oh, I couldn't sleep. It was driving me crazy. But look, I have this nice outcome to show for it. And that helps us to feel better. So worry, normal. Getting up, waking from worry under these conditions, so normal. Use the time constructively as best you can. When you are tired later in the day, don't worry, grab a nap, you know, assuming you can, even if it's 5 or 10 minutes to kind of recharge yourself. The other thing to be mindful of is your fatigue during the day. When we are fatigued, we are less resilient, we're less mindful, and we can be more chippy, more argumentative, more prone to depression. So it's almost like we have to monitor our own mood state through the day, because depending on our mood, that determines how we act. So by being aware of our mood, we can then put thinking between feeling and doing. We have a feeling, don't just go to doing, put thinking in between, realize, oh yes, I'm fatigued, I wouldn't normally act this way, and we can catch ourselves so that when we go to doing, we're going to behave, we're going to do, we're going to interact with others in a way that's more reasonable to the circumstance.
So you're talking in a way about being conscious of how you're feeling, not just allowing the feeling to be a reflex to an action.
Yeah, absolutely.
So like being mindful, like I'm feeling like X, this is why, here's what I should do, to sort of cut the feedback loop.
That's it. So it involves a little conversation with yourself. That's the heart of cognitive behavioral therapy. You know, in a nutshell, cognitive behavioral therapy is putting thinking between feeling and doing.
How about yourself? You know, how are you dealing with this situation? You know, you run a business. You're not immune to the feelings and experiences that other people are having. How do you sort of eat your own dog food, I guess?
I've never heard it put that way. How do I eat my own dog food? A couple of ways. Not just for me, but I think for others too. I think one of the best strategies for dealing with stress, we're all under stress, is being of service to others. First of all, stress stress causes us to limit our view of the world. It causes us to be very self-centered, very self-focused, very inward. And as we're inward, self-focused, concentrating on our stress, we amplify it inadvertently, and we become worse. When we think in terms of service, when we think in terms of volunteerism, when we think in terms of doing for others, it's the opposite. We get out of our own head and we try to empathize with others, connect to others. We are doing on behalf of others. It's a very selfless thing. It helps us to change our perspective from inward to outward. And this is what I do. We can all do it, each in our own way, appropriate to what works for us. I have an extensive following on social media, so I'm an influencer because of that. And I say I want to use it for good. I want to enhance, enable, facilitate well-being. So I'm forever posting content through Facebook and LinkedIn, a little bit on Twitter, but mostly Facebook and LinkedIn. I'm forever posting content that is of service to the folks following me. And when I say of service, how to get along with others, how to manage children, how to deal with, as we're doing today, stress and anxiety. They comment, they ask questions, we engage, it becomes a community, and I feel good helping others. They feel better for having received the input. They in turn share that with others as well, and can feel good about what they're sharing, that they're offering information that's of service as well. So that's my strategy. Other people's strategies, because I follow a number of different Facebook pages. People are putting messages out there. I'm available for pickup and delivery of household items. So you can phone in your order to a grocery store, but you may not have the means to pick it up. There's folks who just, for no other reason but kindness, are making themselves available to pick up people's orders and bring it to their home. Now, look, there can be a lot of scams out there. Netting, whatever we call this. But that is another strategy. Others, I've been watching posts by Indigenous children, particularly young girls. They're doing something called the jingle dance. And the jingle dance, they wear an outfit that's adorned in many, many bells. And they do a traditional Indigenous dance that causes the bells on their dresses to jingle. This is a dance of healing. And so we have all these beautiful, wonderful Indigenous girls posting their healing dances on the internet. So I've already shared a couple of those as well. These are things that are within people's control, where they can give back, be mindful of others, and offer something of service. Other people are posting tasks, things that they can do with their kids while they're home over this period. So just because we are socially isolating ourselves, keeping a 6-foot distance, it doesn't mean that we can't find creative ways to be helpful. We can also get young children to draw pictures and walk through the neighborhood, post it on a post, drop it off in a neighbor's mailbox, so we can still maintain the social distancing, yet spread good messages. This is my strategy. Being of service to others helps me to cope better.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned that, because in many of the talks that I do about crisis management, I witness, and you see a lot of this in the news media, where a company will be going through a crisis and the leaders demonstrate zero empathy. I believe empathy is one of the first victims when your company is hit by a crisis, because the stress, the way I refer to it is it puts blinders on you. And a normally empathetic individual, when dealing with a death or an injury or a production crisis or something in their organization, all of that seems to go out the window, and then they just start focusing on, how do I make this go away? And again, it's that part deep inside our brain, that sort of primitive element that starts feeling and making decisions for us. And so you have people who are experienced, who are trained, who are have access to resources, who make bad decisions. And I think stress is one of the reasons why. It seems to feed into what you just said.
Yeah, absolutely. Empathy can be a casualty of stress. So again, being mindful, literally catching our breath, lowering our shoulders, thinking of the experience of others and those around us, and simply checking in with them. You don't need to guess what they're feeling. You can ask what they are feeling. So we say, how are you doing? How are you coping? My wife and I were out for a walk with another couple yesterday on a golf course, which allowed for a lot of social distancing with their dogs. We didn't even let the dogs sniff each other, for crying out loud. Talk about social distancing. And as we met with other people out walking, and we did keep our distance, we checked in. How are you doing? How are you coping? How are you managing? These are strangers, let alone within one's own company. The mere act of checking in, displaying a bit of empathy, helps us to connect, helps us get out of our own head, helps us to actually feel better. You know, Warren, one of the most protective factors against mental illness is connection. And here we are at a time in history when we're practicing isolation. We need to distinguish that we're not trying to disconnect from people. We're just trying to put a physical space between us so that we don't transmit the virus. We actually want to stay socially connected.
Right.
We want to know how people are doing. We want to reach out. We want to ask the questions. The degree to which we do that is protective against anxiety and depression, particularly during these times.
So I want to talk about finance now, because that is one of the underwriting, you know, I've never seen anything impact the entire economy the way it is now, with airlines shut down, hotels shut down, restaurants shut down, hairdressers, like salons, contractors, like just you name it, you and me. You know, we chatted earlier, we're both having very good years, and suddenly everything is just vaporized. What do you tell people from a financial, like, you know, I'm seeing, like, I'm trying to educate myself and pay attention to what's out there. Cause, you know, one of the sources of anxiety is the unknown. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen? When's it going to end? You know, how's it going to affect me, my family, my neighbors? And, I'm hearing two very distinct narratives out there right now. And I don't know which one is correct, but one is, we are in for 18 months, 2 years of lockdown, financial depression. It's going to be worse than it ever has, and the world will never be the same. That's on one end. And on the other is, I've heard very educated people whom I respect say, China's getting back to normal now. You know, it's a 3-month cycle. There's no new illnesses. Things are stabilizing. Apple's opened all their stores. The stock market there is kind of coming back. So that, you know, by summer things should be normal. So you have these two very different, sort of polar opposites, and a lot of speculation in between. In some ways, I'm thinking that's one of the things, like, you know, you find you can get yourself into a place where you think you realize what the next few months are going to look like. And then you read one of these pieces, or you listen to a podcast, and there's a lot of Chicken Littles out there talking doom and gloom. How do you reconcile that? You know, with, you know, as human beings, we have a desire to, especially with all this spare time on our hands, right? Like right now, we have more spare time as adults than we probably had since we were in school and in the summer holidays, right? Because we've all pretty much been working since then. Yeah. So what, you know, what's your advice for dealing with the unknown and the desire to want to sort of peel back the curtain and see what's going to happen next?
Boy, you've got some great questions there, Warren. One thing that makes us human, or one of the challenges in being human, is coping with uncertainty. Most of us can't stand it. We have our routines. When I wake up in the morning, I go to the bathroom, I brush my teeth, I comb my hair, then I will shower, or maybe I'll comb my hair after the shower, and then I get dressed and have my cup of tea and get in front of my computer, check it. We have our routines. These routines provide us certainty. It's a structure over our time and over the world. Coronavirus, or COVID-19, has taken away certainty. That creates a lot of anxiety for people. We don't know what to do with ourselves. Our routines have evaporated. Part of the uncertainty that we're also dealing with is how long will this last? So you're right. We have these doomsday predictions to joyful fantasies that it's only going to be a couple of weeks. I'm a bit of a realist. I'm guessing that it's going to be somewhere in between. I don't think this is a doomsday scenario. I think it's going to be an awful scenario, but not the end of the entire world as we know it. But it's certainly going to be a changed world on the other side. Many folks will be losing their jobs through this, hopefully on a short-term basis. They need to worry about survival. That's a huge part of uncertainty, just surviving financially. I'm encouraging people to know who their friends are, to know who their families are. I'm encouraging people to reach out, be aware of those amongst us who are losing their jobs or at risk of losing their jobs, or who are simply not receiving a paycheck. The job is there, ready to return to, but they've been laid off. We need to share and pool our resources. That's how we get through that. So if I've got extra toilet paper or a meal, I'm going to share that with my neighbor. That's my choice. This is also uniquely human. There are those who are going to hoard out of fear. It's a fear response. And there are those who are going to give. We need to encourage that. That is within our control. That is in part the antidote to some of that uncertainty. Knowing that there are those folks out there who will continue to provide support, who will continue to share. I don't know, did I answer the question?
For sure. I was going to mention hoarders, and then you brought it up as well. That's been fascinating to me. As I watched this situation unfold over the last few months, I got the sense, like I actually sent a text to my sister, and this is very early days. And I said, this looks like this has the makings of something that could be pretty bad. Wouldn't it be interesting if the whole world could just shut down for 14 days? And then, because that was my understanding of the duration of the illness. If the whole world stopped for 14 days, we'd get rid of it. And it was kind of like a joke, like that. Of course, the world, you don't shut down the world. And we've mentioned that a few times since, in that, like, that seemed so insane. It seemed unthinkable. And here we are with countries basically, you've got some countries where if you walk out of your house, you're getting fined, you're having penalties. And I think that's starting in British Columbia today. I saw that in the news. So going back to the hoarder piece, and I don't know if you saw the one last night about the woman and the man in the truck. They bought all of the toilet paper and paper towels, like a truckload. Like just imagine a large pickup truck stacked with boxes, and there was a woman kind of videotaping her and shaming her. Don't you think that element made it so much worse? When everyone went in and, like, seeing empty grocery shelves in your store and seeing them on the news, wasn't that like the match that kind of ignited it in a lot of people's brains? Like you said that anxiety is contagious. To me, that was a huge flashpoint.
Yeah. It's interesting. My wife was out shopping a week ago Thursday, before the announcement closing the schools for another 2 weeks. So she was at our local grocery store, and, she gives me a phone call. Do we need this or that? No. What's it like out there? It was actually quiet because of in the initial stages of this coronavirus, people were already kind of staying home, self-isolating. So the grocery store was quiet. By the time she got home and the announcement was made that the school was closing, people were already texting images of the same grocery store packed with lines all around it and the toilet paper flying off the shelves. Yeah, this is a fear response. People are worried that they may not be able to get out. People are worried that they're not going to have supplies to get through. This is where government comes in, by the way. We need to be reassured that what they call the supply chain, in other words, Trees will be cut down, trees will be turned into pulp, pulp will be turned into paper, paper will be turned into toilet paper, toilet paper will be placed on trucks, trucks will go to grocery stores, and people in grocery stores will stock the shelves. That's a supply chain. We needed the government to reassure us that these supply chains will be kept intact, which they have. And over the week, we're seeing less and less of that fear mentality, the hoarding, the grabbing all you can. So yeah, hoarding is kind of a primitive response to a perceived threat to the anxiety. We are anticipating a future problem, and we want to make sure we're going to survive it. So no shame to those folks who grab from that perspective. Shame to those who are looking at it from a nefarious perspective, that if they capture the market on these items and there's none out there, they can turn a profit. So there are some folks seeking to be remarkably entrepreneurial. I'm trying to put a positive.
That's not even the
on.
right word for that.
I know it isn't.
It's like
there are some
predatory.
folks who are predatory entrepreneurial, if you will, seeking to take advantage. Interestingly, I saw that Costco and other places have posted that you can't return this stuff. So there may be those who are stuck with a huge supply that they'll eventually have to give away because they have no room for it. So yeah, this hoarder mentality, it is a fear response. It's generated by the anxiety. As we come to realize that the supply chain will continue, that fear response can subside, and indeed, from that perspective, we'll return to a new normal.
Personally, I think it's helpful for me to, and I don't know if this is a tactic that you would support or that other people could use as well, but I like to try to take the camera. I imagine I'm the director of my own life, and I kind of pull the camera back, because we're so focused on what's the number today and what's happening today in the grocery stores and my neighbor and what your relative said today, and just the Twitter. If you've been on Twitter, it's just a nightmare stream. Like, it's all this content, and it's sometimes helpful for me to just kind of pull the camera back a little bit and look at it generationally, like over time. Like, I think of that chart, that famous chart of the stock market since it opened, and the Great Depression looks like a little blip on there, and just you have this steady slope that goes up over time. There's a lot of quotes that come to mind. This too shall pass. And
Warren, we will get through this, and even financially, many jobs are going to be lost.
Oh, yeah.
However, I see such phenomenal opportunity arising out of this. The other piece that we didn't talk about from a financial perspective is the decline of a barrel of oil.
Oh, $28?
Yeah. So now that it's at that level, it just doesn't make sense to produce in Canada and the US. Then the question becomes, what do we do? Now we have the incentive to change manufacturing over to green technologies. I am hoping, I don't have a good crystal ball, but I am hoping that we see manufacturing ramp up on green technologies, and that we get technologically more sophisticated in green energy products. I think there will be tons of employment available in that sector to make up for what has been lost in oil and gas.
Right. The way my brain is wired, and I go up and down, right? So you have moments of like, holy shit, this is not looking so good. And then an hour later, I'm looking for the opportunity. Like you said, there's that, I think it was Einstein had that famous quote, in the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And so I'm constantly, and maybe this is just my mind trying to stay busy, but, I was chopping up videos last night. You talked about sharing content on LinkedIn. I was chopping up videos from keynotes that I've done over the past year that I'm going to be sending out, in the next month or so, time that I wouldn't have had otherwise. How can I change my business or adapt this? Like, my mind is working on these puzzles of the future. Is that like a make work project for your brain? But I'm trying to create something out of this. Historically, these have been huge buying opportunities in the stock market. Like Warren Buffett in the global financial crisis, that was one of his most successful financial moves, is he bought the stocks of these companies at these all-time lows and just made a killing on them. So I think it's possible to hold those two things in your mind at the same time. Things are not great. We're dealing with this unprecedented situation where everyone is basically sitting at home trying to wait it out, and the economy has come to a halt. But whether it's 2 months, 3 months, 8 months, I think there are going to be some tremendous opportunities on the other side of this, even for people whose businesses might have disappeared. I think communities will rally, and if you had a favorite pizza place in Hamilton that went out of business, I think those communities will rally to bring those people back. Like I don't think I'm dreaming here. I think that we're going to become more supportive of our neighbors after this. I'm hoping anyway.
And we've seen that pretty much after every natural disaster, after wars, where once the dust settles, people do reconnect, rebuild, and move forward. That is part of humanity. We will do that again following this crisis. Thank goodness. That's part of humanity. We all strive towards life, not towards death. We strive to live. We strive to create and recreate and procreate. We will do that. There will be a period of time, though, Warren, where we will mourn. And there will be plenty to mourn. It's not something that you've asked me about, but it's something I think we need to touch on. There's going to be a lot to grieve. There will be loss of life. And across the developmental spectrum, it could be babies, pregnant mothers, it could be children, adolescents, our elderly. This virus is running rampant as we speak through several seniors' residences. So we will need a time to mourn, to grieve, to be sad collectively. That is totally reasonable. That also makes us human to be sad. This is appropriate. And as we integrate our losses into our lives, then we can continue to rebuild. It's not either or, it's a little bit of both. I don't like talking in terms of getting over it. These are not things that we get over, but we integrate them in our lives. There was a famous psychiatrist, a Jewish fellow by the name of Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust. It was his observation that he knew very quickly of those entering the concentration camps who would survive the experience and who would die without being sent to the gas chamber, but who would die just from the experience within a few days of being there. And as per his observation, those who could find meaning in their suffering tended to have a higher survival rate. Even though our enemy combatant is a virus, I still think that holds true. The degree to which we can find meaning in what is going on for us, and don't ask me what that is for you. For me, it's the meaning is, as a world, we need to slow down. As a world, we need to be mindful of the world's limited resources. Other meaning that I extract from this experience, I'm looking at images of the earth being restored from pollution, given that we've turned back the smokestacks in so many areas. So I'm extracting some meaning from this. I'm also being mindful of my interpersonal relationships with my loved ones, with my friends. I'm finding meaning in those connections. So those of us who can find meaning through this, I think will do better than those who do not. It will help us to survive. Sorry about that. It will help us to survive And but we will have to grieve. We will have to mourn, and that will be part of the process too.
Of course, that's kind of the elephant in the room, I guess. At this point, I think certainly we're recording this in Canada. I think we are just at the beginning of we are one of the later countries to be hit by this wave. And I think the worst is obviously yet to come here for the next few weeks. So that's certainly something to be mindful of. I mentioned social media sort of in passing. What is your professional take? And again, every person is unique and different, but what's your take on the, how to use it or avoid it in these times? Because as I mentioned earlier, going through Twitter is 98% of the tweets are just like a shitstorm, and then you have cat videos and some funny memes or whatever. But partly people want to stay informed, and I think the attention that these platforms are getting is off the charts because everybody's at home and watching them and scrolling, and we want that dopamine hit and we want that reassurance. How much is that feeding into this as well? And are there best practices? Do you limit screen time? Do you mute certain words? How do you, if you think it might be an issue, or if you're that person waking up at 4 a.m, you're opening up your phone and just making it worse, what are some best practices when it comes to social media?
So I was checking in with my brother. Actually, he was checking in with me last night, and we're asking each other, how you doing? And I said, what are you doing to survive, Alan? And he says, I've turned off the news. Says, I know what's going on out there. I don't need to know moment to moment. I don't need it like that ticker tape stock feed. So turning off the news was his survival strategy for managing the anxiety of the coronavirus. If your news feed or Facebook feed, wall or other social media, if it's loaded with stuff that scares you, by all means start turning it back. Dial it down. Go do other things. This you think of it in the context of self-care. I don't stick my fingers into light sockets. I'm not going to do that. I've learned when I stick my finger in a light socket, it hurts. The same thing with social media. It can hurt you. Now, it is very inducting, and it's kind of like banging your own head against the wall. It feels so good when you stop. So I'm encouraging a lot of people to dial it back, except for, and this is important, you don't need to dial it all back. If it is life-enhancing, if it is humorous, if it is music, those things that calm us, relax us, make us laugh, make us feel good, distract us in a positive way, then continue. I liken social media to the city of Toronto. I say to parents, when was the last time you ever took your kids, dumped them in downtown Toronto or New York or Chicago, wherever people are listening to this? When was the last time you dumped your kids downtown in a major city and left? You don't do that. You don't know where that child is going to wander. There's beautiful museums to see downtown, and there's also strip clubs and bars and persons who would exploit you. So when we compare that to the internet, we can't say internet all good, internet all bad. It's not that black and white. We have to be selective. So I'm encouraging people to be selective. It may be time to prune your friends, to prune the tree. And if you have folks who are forever negative and spewing hate and scary things, you can let them know that you need to take a break from that. Not harshly. I don't want people to be out there as warriors ranting, but kindly and calmly saying, this stuff has been getting to me. It's a little too overwhelming. I'm going to have to take a break from your feed for a while. I just wanted to let you know that that's what I'm doing. so that we can also give feedback to one another in terms of what is working for us and what is not working for us. We do it from a place of caring and compassion, though.
Okay. So you mentioned kids within the social media context. I guess we'll get ready to wrap up. I want to respect your time. We've been chatting almost an hour. I saw Trudeau, Prime Minister Trudeau came out, I think it was yesterday, and addressed children directly, which is sort of novel for a world leader to be talking directly to the kids. And thanks for helping your parents get through this. And it was a very nice little piece of communication, no matter what party you support. What is your recommendation for parents dealing with kids? We talked, and again, I heard your piece on the radio this morning talking about kids, 3 years old and up, and it's different strategies ideally. But, and we talked about the piece earlier. If your child sees you fret, they'll be fretting as well. What are some strategies? And, I've got two kids, 12, almost 13 and 15. So they're in that sort of know-it-all phase where, you try to give them advice and you get the eye roll and the sort of, the you're a loser kind of like just kind of glance. Great kids, but just different communication techniques. So what would be your advice to parents? And why don't we start with like the kind of, when they're first making memories and on the grid, sort of like, 3-4 years old, up to the teen years. What's some tips for people to communicate with their kids in these times when you're trying to, you don't want to be, everything is perfect, but you don't want to be creating anxiety as well. It's just how do you be honest and forthcoming and truthful with them in a way that respects the way they want to be communicated with?
Right. So let's start with 0 to 3. You're not going to go, 3-year-old, let me explain this thing called coronavirus. The 3-year-old just isn't going to get it. What that 3-year-old or 0 to 3-year-old will respond to is your own mood. So remember, our feelings are always contagious. We want to approach our kids from a place of calm. The degree to which we do that, so too might they remain calm. For that 3 to 4, maybe 5-ish, these are kids who are already learning about germs. So you say, well, there's a lot of germs out there that need to be cleaned up. And until they're cleaned up, we need to stay away from people and indoors, and we'll make the most of it. For that 5 to 7, 8, 10-year-old even, they are catching wind of the news. They are seeing things even on Facebook. If not yours, they're looking over. If not theirs, they're looking over their shoulder onto yours. So we want to be curious about their experience. So it's less us telling them than us engaging them. What do you make about what's going on? What's this like for you, sweetheart? Do you miss your friends? How do you stay connected, sweetheart? So by engaging them in a conversation, we're also at a place where we can learn what may be an issue for them. I encourage parents not to jump in with their own problem solving, because when we jump in with ours, it's stuff that may work for us but not work for the child, and it usurps the child learning to be creative on their own.
That's good. That's one of my worst. I like to solve everybody's problems for them.
Yeah, no, we'll leave them with their problem, but say to them, how would you solve that, sweetheart? What do you think some of the solutions are? What are other people doing in those circumstances? Can you find some sources of information that other folks are doing, and we can see what works? I'm curious to know what you've learned. Can you come back to me and let me know what you've learned? So we're putting them on task to manage themselves. First of all, let them be independent so they don't drive you crazy, right? The last thing you want is all these kids dependent. I'm bored. And it becomes your job to entertain them. No, you'll drive each other nuts. So you want to put them in a position to be independent. So what are you going to do with that, sweetheart? Let them, do you want to phone grandparents? Do you want to phone aunts, uncles? Do you want to phone a friend? Do you want to phone a friend's parent? So that they can be in charge of figuring out what will work for them, and they can report back to you. And then you can say, because you're still the parent, You still have veto power, executive power. You say, oh, okay, these are some things that we can do. Those are some things, well, because of this and that, we can't do. And you facilitate the problem solving with the child. Adolescents, heaven help us all, because they already knew the answer before we asked the question, many of them. And I've been receiving, Warren, what I call the impossible questions. These are from parents who are frantic because their teen may be more difficult, more challenging. They don't listen. They think they know everything. They may have already issues with drugs or alcohol, non-compliance, school-related issues. And the impossible question is, how do I get my teen to listen? They're still kissing their girlfriend on the face. They're still running back and forth between girlfriend and boyfriend's house. They're still hanging out in groups. The answer to the impossible question is we can't solve all these problems. So there will be some parents for the more challenging teen where they have to set limits and boundaries if they can't manage to set and maintain expectations. We have some parents where I'm suggesting to them that no, if you are immunocompromised, you can't have your teen running out, playing with their friends, and coming back into your home, placing you at risk. You're going to have to let them know they're going to have to find another place to stay. So in these more extreme cases where it's no longer a discussion and facilitating the child's problem solving, we may have to set some pretty strong limits and boundaries. And that will be very difficult and very scary for these parents. Hopefully we can reach out to them, hold their hand through that, recognize that they will worry for their child's life should their child come ill and they're not allowed back in the home. These can be very dire times. So depending on the age of your child, we're going to bring our calm, we're going to engage them in a conversation. For that older child, teenager, 20-something, who is so know-it-all, non-compliant, and going to do their own things, those parents are going to have to set some pretty rigid boundaries and limits.
Right. Thank you for that. And finally, what about exercise? Obviously, one of the best stress reducers, anxiety releases to, go out and run or lift weights, except we have all the gyms are closed, all the pools are closed, everything's closed. I've been personally trying to, and I sent this in a note to you the other day, I've been trying to walk 15 to 20,000 steps a day. And that'll be like I'm fortunate, I've got some trails out by my house. There's, nobody around and there's no groups of people. And even when I'm bumping into someone on the trail, everybody's kind of keeping their distance in that little bubble that we've been told to do. That's been big for me. How do you exercise when all you have is basically your house and maybe walking around the block? Like, is there, first of all, do you agree that exercise is a great anxiety reducer? And then, and I don't mean to turn you into a personal trainer here, but like, what would be some tips for people? Like, we're doing at-home workouts. Can you run around the block? And I've heard different opinions on this. With some people are saying like you shouldn't be going out of the house at all. You should just be staying in the house and not walking outside, which seems, if you don't have any symptoms, seems a little extreme. So I don't know what you've heard or what your thoughts would be on that.
You don't just ask a little question.
It's a whole bunch of stuff jammed together.
A huge question. On the matter of exercise and anxiety, there is scientific literature, research to support that the degree to which we exercise, it does help control anxiety. So somehow or other, there is that connection between the two. So we do want to encourage exercise. We not only want to encourage it for the sake of managing anxiety, but also one's health during all of this. One of the Facebook videos that I saw this morning was of this little dog. It looks like a schnauzer. I don't know what kind it is, but it looks like a schnauzer. And it talks in this little voice like this, and it has like this accent and inflection. And it says, you humans, you're having a hard time right now. And it goes on, and it says, even though you're living in your pajamas and sweatpants, remember to put on your button pants, every now and again, because you're going to get fatter. It was the funniest video. But we do want people to exercise. There is going to be plenty of personal trainers putting their content for free on social media. They will tell you what to do. I'm not an exerciseologist. I'm a social worker. I can't tell you what to do.
Oh, you look pretty ripped there. I can see you on Zoom. You look pretty ripped.
I'm ripped. Yeah, you should see me in profile. But by all means, follow some of these personal trainers. They're amazing. I don't know how they do it, but they can turn anything into an exercise and add that to the routine in your day.
But getting rid of some of that energy, I think, in some way, even if it's a long walk, I find very
dance with your partner, dance with your children. This is such a fun way to exercise as well. Put in time and reconnect. I'll tell you another good thing to do for stress and anxiety. We didn't talk about it, but we're going to know about it in 9 months' time, and that's sex. Sex. Listen, if you're self-isolated, you can practice with your own self. It could be sex for one, and with the partner. I don't know how you practice safe sex in the age of coronavirus. Don't kiss, no tongue, wash your hands. But you can also engage in sex and sexual activities with a consenting adult, just to be clear. This also relieves stress, and I am sure we're going to see a
baby
blip
boom
in birth rates in a year's time.
I'm waiting to see the first genius who calls their kid COVID. I guarantee that's going to happen. Guaranteed.
How could you do that to a kid, eh?
Well, everyone during Game of Thrones, everyone's calling their kid Khaleesi.
Oh, wow.
And then she turned out to be this horrible, horrible character. So just before we wrap up, any books you would recommend, podcasts you'd listen to in this just sort of anxiety reduction, mindfulness, wellness, anything that you think, because there's a lot of BS out there as well, but is there anything that you would recommend that people watch, listen to, or read that would help them on this through this situation?
The resources are actually endless. I would encourage people to explore on their own, ask their friends what works for them. There's a number of meditation websites or podcasts or programs, apps that are available. I'm familiar with several of them. They're all good. The issue is what works for you, and sometimes you have to try one or two of these different web apps to find the one that suits you personally. So yeah, speak with your friends, ask them what they're doing. This is another way of connecting solely and being supportive of one another. So rather than my giving you, here's the list, go do it, I want you to connect after having heard this podcast, connect with 2 or 3 or 4 other folks, ask them how they are doing, ask them what they're doing to stay on top of this. If there's any sites that they're following, think of that as being of service and connecting.
Excellent.
I apologize. My phone is going kind of nuts, but it'll stop in a second.
Mr. Popular. Well, I'll let you get to your calls. Thank you very much. All the best to you and your family. We'll be sure to check in a couple weeks' time and see how everything's going. And I'll keep in touch with you on Facebook and all those sorts of things. But
I got to tell you, just before you sign me off, Warren, I so appreciated your giving me a call, asking me to do this. This is another great way of being of service. You're a terrific guy. I see everything that you post. I see everything.
You're like Santa.
You've been nice. You haven't been naughty. You're of tremendous service. So you are practicing much of what we've talked about here today. Good on you.
It's very nice of you to say. Thank you very much, sir. All the best, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay.
Big thank you once again to Gary Direnfeld for taking the time to speak with me today. And of course, as always, thank you to you for taking the time to listen. If you haven't taken an opportunity to do so, please stop by Apple Podcasts and leave a review or a rating or a comment for the show. Helps other people to find this content. Anyway, thank you very much. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time.